All right, let's talk about entry-level photosynthesis. What's the equation? Unbalanced. Let's be rebels. Carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of enzymes and light, of course, gives us
glucose
and oxygen, right? You should be able to do this as fast as you can write. I really hope so. Not to mention, this is the last question on the exam that you're going to give me next Thursday. So we color coordinate these. Why? Because we're trying to show that the carbon and the oxygen in the, ready, glucose, G3P, right, originally came from the carbon dioxide, and that the hydrogen that we find in the glucose originally came from the water. Now, you know it's more complicated than that. You know that this hydrogen really gets broken into electrons and protons, and you know more than this. That's totally fine. In fact, that's wonderful. But when we're doing this, this is an overview so that you understand the broad concepts, because details mean nothing if you don't have a conceptual understanding. So then we come in here like this. This is, I assume you know, photolysis, right? We don't call oxygen a waste. What do we call it?
Byproduct.
Byproduct, totally agree. Yep. What do we do to the water? What do we do? What do plants do to the water? When they go through photolysis, what's the chemistry term for what happens to the water? You bet, that's oxidation. Nice. You're then left with low energy electrons. Those are then excited to high energy electrons, which are then bonded to CO2. What do you want to call this? 3 different choices.
Carboxylation.
Sure. So carboxylation. What else?
Calvin cycle.
Calvin cycle. And then, yep. And then old school, like when I was in high school, we called this carbon fixation, fixing carbon. I would be really surprised if you get a professor that still uses that. That's from 30 years ago, but it's possible. Carboxylation is a much, much better term, okay? And then what should I put then right there? If we have oxidation, we then have reduction. So you can put reduction here, you can put reduction here. In all honesty, you can put reduction is this entire process. Really put it wherever you'd like. So I'll put it here, right? And then of course, see, this is where biologists cheat, right? Because all in here is RUBP, unstable intermediate, PGA, BP, blah, 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 right? Here's all the alphabet stuff. We just go, yeah, CO2. What's wrong with this diagram?
It doesn't go to the oxygen, it goes to the glucose.
Yeah. I was just seeing if you were paying attention on a Friday morning. Sorry about that. Hey, how about if we put this here? Holy smokes. There we go. It's because I'm talking too much. Like such, okay? And then the other thing that we could add is this process right here. This is photosystem 2, and this over here is photosystem 1. Okay, big, broad picture idea. And where does this process happen in the cell? Happens in the chloroplast. Okay, now the mistake that a lot of students make is they say, oh, plants do photosynthesis and then animals do cell rest. That's not accurate, okay? In that plants and animals do cellular respiration. Plants have both chloroplasts and mitochondria. We only have mitochondria. So plants can actually do more biochemistry than we can. Okay, so don't fall into the trap that plants don't do cell rest. All eukaryotes do cell rest. So down here, we'll put cellular respiration. And then for the most part, I'm going to say that this process happens in the mitochondria. The process doesn't completely happen in the mitochondria. There's 3 steps to cell resp. 2 out of the 3 happen in the mitochondria. Okay, one of them doesn't. One happens out in the cytoplasm, right? But for the most part, cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. All right, all you have to do is take this equation and flip it and put it down here. All cellular respiration is photosynthesis backwards. And then you tack ATP on the end, okay? Because light comes in here, and that's the energy in, and then energy comes out here with ATP. So I'm going to take these and bring them right down here. C6H12O6 plus O2. This is only enzymes. Of course, cellular respiration doesn't need light. And then the products, CO2, H2O, and ATP. This is what it's all about, taking the energy of sunlight and storing it chemically. Energy comes in right here, the light that comes in here. That energy is captured by those electrons. Those electrons are then stored in this macromolecule, right? So the energy is now here, the sunlight energy, technically. That sunlight energy is then here and is transferred to here. This is really energy transfer from sunlight to chemical energy, right? Now, your colors here are important, so bring these same colors down here. So we have the hydrogen, because the right-hand side of your brain sees color. That's how the right-hand side of your brain processes, so be sure to keep these colors consistent. Over here like this. I'm not feeling it today. Should that oxygen be yellow?
No.
Nope. Yep. He's not my friend today. That one should be purple, I agree. There we go. Be nice to me today. There. Something like that. Okay. All you're doing is taking this as photosynthesis backwards and then ATP out the end. So then let's take this and zoom this in so you can see it. So, first thing that happens, this CO2 is removed. Again, it's not waste. It's a byproduct. Okay? What do we call the process of ripping CO2 out?
Decarboxylation.
Totally agree. That's decarboxylation. That's why the term carboxylation and decarboxylation is so much better. Otherwise, it's carbon fixation and then carbon unfixation, carbon defixation. That's awful, right? Carboxylation bonds electrons to the CO2, and when you start to rip those bonds apart, that's decarboxylation. Cool. So really what comes out here, what you're after, is the high energy electrons. These are the same high energy electrons from photosystem 1. Okay, when we eat food, the electrons that are in the food, those high energy electrons, those are originally excited in photosystem 1 of plants. This is really why we eat right here. Okay, so since electrons are being ripped out of the food, what do we call this step right here? What is this? As electrons are
Oxidation.
excellent, that's oxidation. We oxidize our food. Plants do the same thing. Plants oxidize the macromolecules that they produce. So you then have these high energy electrons. These high energy electrons are converted to low energy electrons. Okay, you have some background here. There's an electron transport chain here, and there's an electron transport chain that uses the energy of the electrons to pump protons to create a proton gradient to then phosphorylate ATP. Okay, but usually when we introduce this, we just say hey, the high energy electrons are converted to low energy electrons and energy comes out. Speaking in very general terms, right? Why? Because we're trying to teach concepts. How and what actually happens in here with an electron transport chain, a proton gradient, and chemiosmosis is not important now. We'll get into that detail next week, okay? The energy is pulled out. Well, then you're left with these low energy electrons, right? Well, these low energy electrons need to be returned to the ecosystem. Well, how do you do that? Well, you bond these electrons to protons, what is commonly written as H+. Chemists write protons as H+. There's a big difference between an H and H+ in chemistry, okay? H is hydrogen, it's an atom, it's an element, right? Whereas H+ is a subatomic particle, it's a proton. So when you bond an electron to a proton, what do you make?
Hydrogen.
Yep, you make hydrogen, okay? Then hydrogen bonded to oxygen makes
Water.
water. This is why we breathe oxygen. Everybody knows. I mean, you can walk up to a child and say to the child, what gas do you have to breathe or you'll die? And they'll go, oxygen. Yeah, great. But then you ask them why, and they go, because. This is the biochemical reason why, okay? Oxygen is the electron acceptor. Oxygen goes into the mitochondrion of our cells, picks up those low energy electrons and protons, and water comes out, okay? In fact, this water is called metabolic water, right? And this is actually the liquid of your urine, okay? So the water that you deposit into the toilet is actually a byproduct of the oxygen you breathe. If you radioactively label oxygen and give it to, let's say, a mouse in the lab, give that about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and the mouse's urine turns radioactive. That's how we can track these elements in the process. That's how we know where things go, okay? So we have to breathe oxygen to pick up the low energy electrons at the end of cellular respiration to form water. But hold it. Do plants do cellular respiration?
Yeah.
So do plants need oxygen just like we do? Yep. Okay. This is why when people say, oh, we breathe out CO2 for plants and plants make the oxygen for us, it tries to put us and plants on an equal plane. We're not. Okay. We are totally and completely dependent on plants. No plants, we die. That's simple. Okay. We are not equal to plants at all. We desperately need plants. Why? Because they oxygenate our environment. However, do plants need us at all? Do plants need us to produce carbon dioxide for them?
No.
Nope. Plants produce their own carbon dioxide. Okay. So understand that we breathe in oxygen, goes into our mitochondrion, that forms water. We then breathe out CO2. This is cool. We breathe out CO2. Where does CO2 come from? Our food. The food that you eat, okay? The food that you eat, you then breathe out carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide comes from the food that you eat. So plants require oxygen. Plants also release carbon dioxide. So this concept, this fairy tale that plants and animals have this mutualistic relationship is giving us a false importance. It doesn't exist, okay? All right, so then you still have this energy down here. This energy is then used to bond ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and an inorganic phosphate to make ATP. Through which process?
Phosphorylation.
Phosphorylation, you bet. Cool. And the last thing that we should add, we put oxidation. What do we need to add to this?
Reduction.
Reduction. Where? What gets reduced in cell resp?
The water.
The water is formed by the reduction of oxygen. You bet. Yep. And you say, well, hold it. really, isn't there bonding here first before that? I go, yes. However, we say that oxygen is reduced into water. Okay. Right? So understand, all eukaryotes do this. Plants do this, animals, fungus, and protozoans. All eukaryotes do cell resp. Plants require oxygen, and plants produce CO2. Okay? So, big picture idea. All cellular respiration is photosynthesis backwards. It's the opposite. There's cycling here. Oh, come on. I can't fit that whole thing in there. There we go. Like that. Okay. Carbon dioxide and water make glucose, G3P. All right. Then macromolecules go through cell resp. The oxygen comes back and it's ripped apart. And then these go back up here, put together. Down here, ripped apart. Up here, put together. Down here, ripped apart. It's a cycle. This is why plants don't need us at all. Plants have been doing this for an extremely long time, all by themselves. We are poaching, all right? We poach the oxygen for our own cell resp. But ultimately, the food we eat are the high energy electrons from photosystem 1, originally excited by plants. And the energy of sunlight is ultimately transferred into chemical energy of ATP. Then cells use this chemical energy for any cellular work, like growth, synthesis, digestion, movement, light, sound, right? Anything. This is used for any cellular work. So what we'll do on Tuesday is we'll start going through the 3 steps of cell resp. It's not difficult. You will actually find it much easier because you have a background in some of the biochemistry already. And instead of putting these molecules together and exciting the electrons, cell resp is the opposite. We're ripping molecules apart and pulling the energy out of the electrons.